Hello, hello. As promised, I am here to give you some recap lessons on the chapters for Of Mice and Men. So we're going to start with chapter 1. Okay, first of all, there's this very important illusion. All right, so Of Mice and Men is probably one of the most commonly referenced pieces of literature in pop culture, particularly older pop culture from the 40s, 50s, 60s. Cartoons in particular loved referencing George and Lenny. You'd see it all the time. And so I grew up on a lot of these cartoons, and it's kind of funny because I never realized that they were referencing this book. So when I got assigned this book as a 10th grader in high school as well, I instantly had that connection to George and particularly to Lenny. I can't even read Lenny without doing that, "Hey there, George," kind of a voice. I just can't because it's so been ingrained in my mind. All right, so you were asked to draw a picture of the scene that Steinbeck describes at the beginning of the novel. Um, so I'm actually going to read the beginning of that to you. All right, so it says a few miles south of Soledad, the Salinas River drops in close to the hillside bank and runs deep and green. The water is warm too, for it has slipped twinkling over the yellow sands in the sunlight before reaching the narrow pool. On one side of the river, the golden foothill slopes curve up to the strong and rocky Gavilan Mountains, but on the valley side, the water is lined with trees, willows, fresh and green with every spring, carrying in their lower leaf junctures the debris of the winter's flooding, and sycamores with mottled white recumbent limbs and branches that arc over the pool. On the sandy bank under the trees, the leaves lie deep and so crisp that a lizard, making a great skittering if he runs among them, that a lizard makes a great skittering if he runs among them. Rabbits come out of the brush to sit on the sand in the evening, and the damp flats are covered with the night's tracks of coons, and with the spread pads of dogs from the ranches, and with the split wedge tracks of deer that come to drink in the dark. There is a path through the willows and among the sycamores, a path beaten hard by boys coming down from the ranch to swim in the deep pool, and beaten hard by tramps who come warily down from the highway in the evening to jungle up near water. In front of the low horizontal limb of a giant sycamore, there is an ash pile made by many fires. The limb is worn smooth by men who have sat on it. And so some of the images that are so important in this are those trees. Okay, so these trees would have looked like this, right? And so imagine that the men would have been sitting on that low part of the branches, right? And then there'd be like a fire pit here. And this would be close to the water, kind of like this picture, or maybe like this one, right? These low branches. Okay, and picture like all the vagabonds from the train and all the men from the ranch would come here and set up fires and go swimming. So that's the scene that you were asked to describe. Your next question asks you about another strategy that you can use to help yourself come up with the meanings of words, right? We know about context clues, right? You read, and as you read, the other words in the sentence provide you that context, that information that you need to figure out the meaning. Okay? This sentence does not give us good context clues. Okay? Not at all. It says George unslung his bindle and dropped it gently on the bank. There is nothing in this sentence whatsoever to help us. Okay? Now we could read earlier or farther in the story and see if that could help us figure it out. But we could also look it up. We can go to Google and we can look it up. We can find a dictionary and we can look it up. We can find a list of synonyms, right? And go from there. And what I've done is provided a picture for you. This picture is what a bindle looks like. So a bindle is kind of like that bag on a stick that men would carry as they traveled from place to place during this time. So the third question asks, how does Steinbeck show Lenny's animalistic qualities on pages 2 through 4? So in your box, there's already been one example provided, but there are so many examples on these pages. Let me see if I can find some for you. Let's see, it said behind him walked his opposite, a huge man, shapeless of face, with large, pale eyes, with wide sloping shoulders, and he walked heavily, dragging his feet a little, the way a bear drags his paws. His arms did not swing at his sides, but hung loosely, right? Describing that he's got like bear paws, right? And that he drags his arms when he walks rather than moving his arms. Okay, those are animalistic. When he goes to drink out of a puddle, right? That's not something that a human would do. Let me see if I can find you one more example. I can't find one this fast. Oh, so like the description of when he's drinking. Um, said his huge companion dropped his blankets and flung himself down and drank from the surface of the green pool, drank with long gulps, snorting into the water like a horse. The small man stepped nervously beside him. So comparing him to a bear, comparing him to a horse, these other animals, right? Animalistic, meaning like an animal. So find one of those examples and type it in, and then don't forget to cite the page number. Number 4, Lenny droned to himself softly. I ain't gonna say nothing, I ain't gonna say nothing, I ain't gonna say nothing, I ain't gonna say nothing. Which is most likely the meaning of the word droned. Okay, so the word drone has lots of different meanings, right? We can talk about an airplane drone, we can talk about the noise drone, et cetera, et cetera. Okay, based on the context, right, we've got Lenny repeating the same phrase over and over again quietly to himself. Okay, so in this instance, when we're talking about droning, we're talking about speaking quietly under your breath in like a motorist kind of a noise. I ain't gonna say nothing. 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 Number 5. Lenny hesitated, backed away, looked wildly at the brush lines as though he contemplated running for his freedom. George said coldly, "You gonna give me that mouse, or do I have to sock you?" So, what does Steinbeck mean by the underlined phrase, and what does this say about Lenny's character? So, first of all, when they say that Lenny contemplated running for his freedom, they mean he literally stopped and really thought about, like, could I get away from George and could I survive without him, right? Like, he's really thinking, like, I gotta get out of here. Ah, okay. And what does that tell us about Lenny's character, right? If he's so upset about what George is asking him to do, right, about the mouse, getting rid of that mouse, okay, he wants to like run away from George, okay? And a grown adult, typically, when one adult tells another adult, give me that mouse, right? Or something like that, I mean, the second adult doesn't really feel the need to listen, okay? The fact that Lenny feels obligated to either listen to George or to run away from him kind of tells us he's a little bit childlike. Okay? So Lenny maybe doesn't have a fully functioning thought capacity, right? Maybe he has a little bit of a more childlike brain. Maybe he's not very quick. Okay. He definitely looks at George as if George is in charge of him. Okay, so before talking about number 6, we really want to know, is George likable at this point in the novel? And typically, I wouldn't think that he's very likable. He's grumpy, he's whiny, he complains a lot, but at the same time, I think that he's relatable because I feel like most of us really understand what it's like to be responsible for someone or for something. Um, and how much obligation that is, right? How we don't always want to have to look after somebody else. Okay, so it's totally relatable, but not necessarily very likable. But the quote says George's hand remained outstretched imperiously. The underlined word imperiously, by telling us that he stretched out his hand imperiously, right? Imperiously, like empire, like emperor, like leader, like king. Okay, so if he's stretching his hand out imperiously, it's as if he's the leader, the king, like he's in charge. So, using the word imperiously helps us to understand that George is kind of in charge of Lenny. He takes care of him. Lenny listens to him. He's almost like Lenny's king or Lenny's emperor, Lenny's leader. Just a simple word choice, but just like using the word imperiously helps us to understand that dynamic, that relationship. Okay, next question. So describe George's dream in this chapter and does it seem realistic? So remember, George is dreaming of owning his own farm, and he's got quite this picture in his mind of exactly what it's going to look like. And there's going to be a little alfalfa patch, and Lenny's going to take care of the rabbits. Okay, and it all seems so beautiful and so picturesque and so perfect. But does it seem realistic? Okay, and this is completely up to you. At this point in the novel, when I read it for the first time, I did think it seemed realistic. Okay, because just work really hard. If you work really hard, then you can get what you want, then you can achieve your goals, right? That's what we've been taught our whole lives. Okay? If you're willing to put in the hard work, then the good will follow. Maybe you feel differently though. Next one. We don't have to sit. Okay, sorry. This is a quote. It says, "We don't have to sit in no bar room blowing our jack just because we got no place else to go." So first of all, the question in your reading packet asks you to translate this, which is kind of fun. But first of all, you need to understand the individual words. So I ask you to pull out the word jack and make sure that you understand the meaning of that word, because that word can have so many different meanings. It can be a guy named Jack. We can be talking about Jack money. We can talk about Jack cheese. We could be talking about a jack that you use to raise your car. Okay, so it's important to understand how that word is being used so that you can understand the rest of the sentence. So it says, we don't have to sit in no bar room blowing our jack just because we got no place else to go. This is referring to money, jack like money, which isn't really a term that we use anymore, but it was a really popular term during this time period. So if we know that they're talking about money, it says, we don't have to sit in no bar room blowing in our jack just because we got no place else to go. So if I'm going to break this down and say this, I can't say it in, 2020 teenage speak because I'm old, but I can say it, in 35-year-old teacher speak. And it would be something like, we don't have to sit around in a bar room spending all of our money just because we don't have another place to spend our time. Okay. Now you can translate it totally differently. I heard some really great ones in class that use some really cool slang that I'm not privy to because I'm too old. So take a chance, try something, translate that into 2020. Okay, number 9 is about foreshadowing. Okay, and remember that foreshadowing is when the author gives you a clue, some sort of a hint about things that are going to happen later on in the novel. And so the examples that I provided for you on the picture have to do with Star Wars. If you're not a Star Wars fan, I'm sorry. But in one of the Star Wars movies, when we've got little baby Anakin there, they literally show his shadow in the background as the form of Darth Vader. And that's supposed to foreshadow the fact that eventually he grows up to become Darth Vader. So in the things it says, dude, your shadow looks weird. He says, yeah, I know, it always looks like that. Because he's going to turn into Darth Vader. And this one, in the movie Star Wars, the shadow of Darth Vader behind Anakin foreshadows who Anakin will grow up to be. Okay, so that's foreshadowing. In Of Mice and Men, we have all kinds of examples of foreshadowing in chapter 1. First of all, when George warns Lenny, right, he's like, if you get in trouble again, I want you to come over here by the brush, right? We'll meet over here by the brush. Okay? Why would he have to warn him about something unless there might be trouble later on? Okay, there was also a really quick reference to something that happened in another city called Weed. Okay, if something has happened in the past, there's a good chance it could happen again. The mouse, right? The dead mouse in Lenny's pocket that he just keeps petting this dead mouse. That's going to come to something. Okay, all of these are examples of foreshadowing, and there's tons more. Okay. All right, this is chapter 1. I hope you found that helpful. Please use it as you are studying and preparing your digital reading guide. Chapters 2, 3, and 4, and of course 5 and 6 will be coming soon. All right, hope you have a great day.